Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're venturing deep into Texas, where behind the doors of quiet little Airbnbs, some of the most disturbing and unexplained encounters have taken place. From guests who disappeared without a trace to unsettling behaviors no host should ever have to witness, these are 20 true Texas Airbnb stories of disturbing guests. These stories will make you think twice before you hand over your keys or book a night in someone else's home. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And when they do, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling stories we share here at Creepy Vibes. Stories meant only for those brave enough to listen until the very end. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now. Because tonight is just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness isn't done with us yet. Tell me, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is just getting started, and the horror is ready to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. Some places don't like to be disturbed. That's something you learn if you've been in the Airbnb business long enough, especially out here in Texas, where the land holds on to its secrets the way an old drunk grips a whiskey bottle. My name's Aaron Delgado, and for the past 6 years I've rented out a little ranch house on the outskirts of Marfa, right where the land starts to flatten into nothing but heat haze and barbed wire. It's an old place originally belonged to my grandfather before he passed, but I fixed it up well enough to make it comfortable for folks who wanted that desert authentic experience. Adobe walls, creaky wood floors, a front porch that groans under your feet. Nothing fancy. Just isolation, silence, and sky. Most of my guests are city people looking for something they can't find in Austin or Dallas. They want to play cowboy. For a weekend, drink wine under the stars, maybe catch a glimpse of those famous Marfa lights out in the desert if they're lucky. Usually they leave glowing reviews about how peaceful it is, how quiet, how the stars made them feel small in the best possible way. But there are exceptions. Every host has stories if you press them hard enough. Mine started with a man named Daryl Conroy. Daryl booked 3 nights, paid up front. He messaged polite, said he was looking for solitude, wanted to get away from the noise of people. I didn't think much of it. A lot of guests say stuff like that. When he arrived, I met him briefly to hand off the key and show him how to work the old swamp cooler. Middle-aged, maybe late 40s, thin as fence wire and pale in that washed-out way Northerners get when they don't see enough sun. He was wearing a black windbreaker despite it being 100 degrees in the shade. His handshake was soft, his smile even softer, like he wasn't used to doing it. He asked if there were many animals out here at night. I told him sure, coyotes mostly, javelinas sometimes. Maybe a mountain lion if you're real unlucky. He nodded like that's what he wanted to hear. 3 days pass, no word from him. That wasn't unusual. A lot of folks go radio silent once. They settle in. But on the 4th day, after checkout time rolled by and the app showed no sign of him leaving, I drove out there to make sure everything was all right. His rental car was still parked by the porch, dusted over like it hadn't moved. Since he arrived, door locked, blinds drawn. At first, I figured he'd just gotten his dates mixed up. Happens. I knocked. No answer. I called through the door. Nothing. I tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Finally, I used my spare key. Inside, the lights were on, in every room. That struck me as odd right away because most people are careful about that out here. Electricity's not cheap, and I leave a note asking folks to conserve. The SC was running full blast. The fridge door was open, humming in protest. His clothes were still hanging in the bedroom closet neatly, like someone had unpacked with care. a toothbrush in the bathroom, razor by the sink. His suitcase half-zipped at the foot of the bed, socks spilling out like entrails. It wasn't just that he hadn't left yet. It was like he hadn't gone anywhere at all. But there was no sign of him. Not in the house, not in the yard. I called out again, loud this time, the kind of call you use when you're not expecting an answer, but will feel stupid if you don't try. Silence answered back. Not even the hum of the cicadas, like the heat had chased everything away. I stepped into the bedroom, looked at the open closet, the row of hangers with his clothes still hanging like skin waiting for bones. That's when I noticed the mirror. Full-length old thing came with the house. There were fingerprints all over it. Not just hands pressed flat like someone checking their reflection. Fingertips, dozens of them, trailing down like tears. And something else, 2 words smudged into the glass, backwards because of the reflection. I leaned in close to read them. Only one sentence. I'm still here. I left. Locked up behind me. Told myself he'd come back soon, that he'd wandered off for a walk or hitched a ride to town for supplies. People are strange. Travelers especially. They get ideas in their heads out here. Space does that to you. Makes you think you can outrun whatever it is you're running from. I came back that night. Something gnawed at me all day, wouldn't let me settle. I told myself I needed to shut off the lights, lock up proper. That's all, practical stuff. Nothing to do with the fingerprints or the words in the mirror. Nothing to do with the way the house had felt watching me leave. The sun was just dipping below the horizon when I pulled up. His car was still there. My stomach dropped into my boots. I unlocked the door, lights on. AC blasting, fridge open, same as before. I moved through the house slow, careful, like stepping into water where you can't see the bottom. In the bedroom, the closet door was open wider now. The clothes gone, hangers swinging slow. I checked the bathroom. Toothbrush gone, razor gone. Like he'd packed up after all. But I never saw him. I turned to leave, keys in hand, already tasting the dust of the road back to town, when I heard it. Floorboards creaking, not from my weight. From somewhere deeper in the house, slow steps pacing. I called out his name, voice cracking in the heat. Nothing answered but another step. And another, closer. I backed down the hall, heart punching. At my ribs, light flickered in the kitchen. The fridge door swung itself shut with a soft thud. Footsteps again, now from behind me, from the bedroom I just left empty. I turned. Nothing. I turned back. The front door was closed. I hadn't closed it. Then I saw him dot in the reflection of the living room window, standing just behind me, pale face smudged like breath fogging the glass, smiling. Not at me. At himself, like he'd finally found a way to stay. His mouth moved. I didn't hear words, just the shape of them. I'm still here. The lights went out, not just in the house, the car too. My phone, dead like something had chewed through the wires of the world itself. I ran. I don't remember unlocking the door or starting the engine. Just gravel spitting under tires and headlights cutting through the dark like knives through meat. When I came back the next morning with a sheriff in tow, the house was empty. No lights, no clothes in the closet, no fingerprints on the mirror. His car was gone too. Sheriff said maybe he'd come back in the night, packed up and left, decided not to bother telling anyone. I knew better. I could still feel him there, stretched thin between the walls like old wallpaper curling at the edges. I don't rent that house anymore. Took it off the app. Let it rot in the sun the way old places out here know how to do. But sometimes I drive by, late at night when the sky's heavy and mean. The porch light's on again. It shouldn't be. There's no power. Not anymore. Some people check in and never leave. Some places don't let them. The first time it happened, Darren brushed it off. It was late, he was tired, and the new security system he'd installed in his old Galveston house had already sent him a half dozen dumb notifications about moths flapping too close to the porch light, or shadows thrown by the wind-shook trees out back. Movement detected upstairs. He figured it was just the sensors catching a draft or a shifting rafter. Maybe even a glitch. This house was old, after all. Built in 1910, renovated poorly sometime. In the 70s and mostly untouched since. The attic door, up at the end of the hall past the guest rooms, had been nailed shut long before he bought the place. The inspection report said, possible structural concerns, possible vermin activity. Darren had meant to deal with it eventually. But you know how these things go. He didn't think much about it again until it happened a second night, then a third. Always the same thing. Movement detected upstairs. Motion detected attic stairwell. Motion detected attic door. The camera he'd set in the hall showed nothing but darkness most of the time. Sometimes the overhead bulb would flicker faintly, struggling against the age of the wiring. Once, just once, he thought he saw the faint outline of something standing at the top of the attic stairs, not quite a shape, not quite a shadow. Like a trick of bad pixels. He rewound and played it again and again, but after a while it seemed to vanish from the footage altogether. Probably a compression error, he told himself. Those cheap home systems weren't perfect. The real trouble started the night his guest arrived. Tracy was an old college friend, passing through town on her way to a conference in Houston. They hadn't seen each other in years, but they'd stayed friendly online, swapping the usual updates. When she texted that she'd need a place for a night or two, Darren had said sure without thinking too hard about it. It was only after he'd sent the address that he remembered the cameras, the attic, the weird notifications. But it wasn't like he could rescind the offer without sounding crazy. That first evening was fine. They drank beers on the porch. Caught. Up, laughed. She teased him for buying a house so big when it was just him living there. He told her half-jokingly about the motion alerts and the attic he hadn't opened. She laughed, called it classic Darren, always jumping at ghosts. She took the guest room at the back of the hall. The one closest to the attic door. Around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed on the knit stand. Movement detected upstairs. Darren lay there staring at the ceiling. The house groaned like it always did when the wind came up off the Gulf. He unlocked his phone, watched the camera feed. The light in the hall flickered again, weak and sickly yellow. The attic door stood quiet at the end of the frame, the nail heads glinting faintly in the grainy light. Nothing moved. He was almost asleep again when Tracy's voice called out soft and uneasy from the hall. Hey, Darren. He pulled on a t-shirt, went to the door. She was standing there barefoot, arms folded against the chill. I think someone's walking around up there, she said. They both stood there a while listening. The house gave up no secrets. I'll check. Get out tomorrow, he promised. Probably raccoons. Or squirrels. She gave him a look, half amused, half unconvinced. Then went back to bed. The next day he borrowed a crowbar from a neighbor and pulled down the old nails. The attic door shuddered open on a breath of cold, stale air. The steps beyond were choked with dust. No sign of animals. No footprints in the thick gray coat underfoot. Just boxes, old trunks, yellowed newspaper bundles tied with twine. He closed it up again, told himself that settled it. That night, the camera went off again. Movement detected, attic stairwell. Movement detected. Attic door. He watched the feed, breath held. The attic door was open, wide open. Light from the hall stretched only so far into the blackness beyond. And there, in the shadow just past the reach of it, something moved. Not fast, not clear, but undeniably there. A shape. Thin, wrong. It lingered at the edge of sight like a patient thing waiting for darkness to finish its work. He killed the feed. Told himself again it was a glitch. At breakfast, Tracy looked pale, tired. I kept hearing footsteps, she said, like someone pacing. Above me. He lied. Told her he hadn't heard anything. Probably the house settling. That evening she came down the hall with her bags packed. Something's off here, Darren. I don't know what, but I can't sleep in that room again. He offered the couch. She declined. Better a motel. Safer. She hugged him quick and left without finishing her coffee. That night the camera caught more movement. Movement detected upstairs. Movement detected attic stairwell. Movement detected guest bedroom. Guest bedroom? He hadn't set any cameras inside the rooms. Just the hall. The doors. The footage showed the attic door open again. Showed the faint impression of something tall and thin unfolding itself from the darkness above and stepping careful and deliberate down the stairs. Showed the guest room. Door pushed slowly inward, inch by inch. Nothing came back out. He called Tracy the next morning just to be sure. She was fine. Had made it to Houston without trouble. Slept like a rock in her hotel bed. Didn't even dream, but Darren didn't sleep again after that. Not well. The cameras kept sending him notifications night after night. Movement detected. The attic door never stayed closed anymore. Sometimes he'd wake up and find the guest. Room door open too. The bed inside perfectly made, but the pillows dented. The closet door ajar. The faint impression of something long-fingered pressed into the dust on the window glass. The notifications still come. Movement detected upstairs. Sometimes he watches the feed. Sometimes he doesn't. But he knows either way. He's not alone. In the house, he doesn't have guests anymore, but someone or something still watches from the attic. It started the first night, just after 2 a.m. The Airbnb sat quiet all day, nestled at the edge of a dying neighborhood on the outskirts of Waco, Texas. A yellow brick house with sun-faded shutters and a sagging back porch that opened onto nothing but thorny weeds and barbed wire. It was the sort of place people picked when they wanted to be left alone. And the woman who rented it seemed the type. She arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. No luggage except for a single black duffel bag slung over one narrow shoulder, dark sunglasses. Covering her eyes despite the cloudy sky, her thin mouth curled into a tight, humorless smile as she nodded to the host. Her name was listed as Cynthia, no last name, no profile picture, no reviews. Cash payment. She said almost nothing during check-in. Just, thank you. I won't need anything. I like my privacy. The neighbors on either side, both elderly couples who had lived in those crumbling houses for decades, noticed right away. Because by midnight that first night, they heard her, not talking, not pacing, not playing music, laughing. At first, it wasn't clear. Maybe the television, maybe a phone call. But it kept on, faint and broken, leaking through the paper-thin walls. High girlish peals of laughter. Not steady, not normal, but sharp little bursts like hiccups in the dark. It would stop for minutes at a time, then start up again, louder. By the second night, both neighbors had decided it wasn't a TV. It wasn't a call. It was her, alone, laughing at nothing at all. Mr. Darnell from next door said he peeked through his curtains around 2:30 a.m. He could see the glow of a single lamp in the upstairs bedroom, the faint shape of her sitting cross-legged on the floor. Not on the bed, not at the desk, on the floor. Head tilted back, mouth open, laughing into the empty air. Nobody else there. No phone in sight. His wife told him to mind his business, but by Friday, everyone on the block was talking. Friday night was worse. That laugh, it had changed. It wasn't light anymore. It wasn't playful. It sounded hungry, deep shuddering. Bursts followed by long stretches of silence, like she was catching her breath between fits. Sometimes it rose so high it cracked. Other times it dropped so low you could almost feel it under your skin. Mrs. Voss, who lived on the other side, swore she heard her saying something between the laughs. Couldn't make it out through the wall except for the rhythm. 3 words, over and over. Laugh, gasp, whisper. Laugh, gasp, whisper. She didn't see anyone leave the house, didn't hear anyone come. And come Saturday morning, the host showed up to collect the keys and found the place exactly as it had been rented. Bed untouched, fridge empty, duffel bag gone. No car in the driveway. No note. Just one thing was off. In the middle of the upstairs bedroom floor, pressed deep into the old wood like a stain that had seeped down from the bones of the house itself, was a perfect circle, black, burnt looking, and around the edges of it, scratched faintly into the floorboards as if by fingernails dragged in slow circles, were the words Mrs. Voss thought she'd heard. Let me in. Police shrugged it off. Airbnb said it was none of their concern. The woman had left, hadn't she? House wasn't damaged except for that little burn mark. Nothing to investigate, but neighbors whispered. Because 3 nights after the woman left, Mrs. Voss woke up to laughter in her living room. Her husband was fast asleep. The doors were locked. Nothing stolen, nothing moved. Just a chair pulled out from the dining table, and sitting in it was that same black duffel bag, zipped shut. Heavy. And from inside it, soft and slow and curling around the corners of the dark, came that same horrible laugh, like something inside knew a secret, like it had all the time in the world. The police didn't take the bag, didn't even open it, said it wasn't their problem. Mrs. Voss left it outside on the curb. Next morning, it was gone. But now, sometimes especially late, after 2 in the morning, you can still hear her. Not just in that house, not just in that neighborhood, anywhere lonely enough. Anywhere dark enough. A woman laughing at nothing at all. And when the laughter stops, you might hear the words next. 3 of them. Soft. Patient. Scratching their way into your bones. Let me in. The old house wasn't much to look at anymore. The paint had peeled so bad the boards underneath looked like bones poking out from rotted skin. The porch sagged like tired shoulders. Out back, the tall grass had eaten what was left of the swing set. But folks kept renting it out, tourists mostly, couples from the city who thought they wanted to spend a weekend somewhere quaint out in Texas hill country. Some of them made it through the weekend without a story to tell. Most didn't. Lyle knew the place's reputation before he booked it. He'd heard the same whispers anyone else had if they spent enough time in town, about how the upstairs bedroom never stayed rented 2 nights in a row. People got creeped out, packed up early, left excuses about family emergencies or stomach bugs in the guest book. Some of them didn't bother with excuses. They just left. The woman who handled the bookings didn't push for details anymore. Still, Lyle booked it. He told himself it was curiosity, maybe a little boredom. He'd just come off a rough stretch. A divorce, a job he'd lost because he couldn't show up sober half the time, and a sister who'd stopped answering his calls. He told himself it'd be good for him. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere cheap. Somewhere with enough distance between him and everyone who'd gotten sick of him. The house smelled like old wood and mildew when he let himself in. The downstairs was furnished like somebody's grandmother's place, plastic flowers on side tables, heavy floral curtains, yellow light that made everything feel stale and a little too warm. There was a TV, but no cable. A bookshelf with paperbacks no one under 70 would read. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms. One with twin beds, one with a queen, and one with an iron-frame double bed pushed up against the window. That was The one. The room. He didn't know how he knew. The key lady hadn't told him which room people hated. She hadn't needed to. The second he stepped across the threshold, the air felt different. Heavy, still, like stepping underwater. The wallpaper was a faded pattern of roses curling in on themselves like something diseased. The bedspread was too thin for comfort, tucked so tight it looked like it was meant to hold something in. Lyle stood there a long moment, hands still on the doorknob, telling himself he wasn't feeling anything except nerves, except suggestion. He was a grown man. He'd slept in worse places than this. Motel floors, park benches, back seats of cars that didn't even run anymore. He chose that room deliberately because he wanted to prove something to himself. The first night passed without much to note, except he didn't sleep. Not really. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks like constellations, listening to the house breathe. Wood settling, sure, that's all it was. Houses made noises. But this one seemed to know he was listening. Every creak felt like a toe pressed soft against the floorboards. Every gust of wind slid against the house like fingertips testing for soft spots. He thought about turning on the lamp, then told himself that was childish. Then did it anyway. In the morning, nothing looked out of place. The windows were still, locked from the inside. The door hadn't moved. The covers hadn't even shifted much, but Lyle packed his bag anyway. Put it by the stairs. He didn't plan on leaving just yet, but something about having his things ready made him feel steadier. He went out for the day, drove to the next town over, got coffee, sat in his truck and watched people who didn't look like they carried ghosts home with them. By the time he came back, the sun was bleeding out slow behind the hills, and the house looked worse than before, like it had aged faster than the hours allowed. That night, things changed. He woke up because something touched him, not hard, not sharp, just soft, curious. A fingertip against the side of his neck, tracing the line of his jaw. His eyes snapped open, and the room was wrong. It was dark, yes, but not empty. Something stood at the far corner, where the wallpaper had peeled down in long, weeping strips. He couldn't see it, not really. Just the shape it made against the dark. The outline of someone standing too still, watching. He didn't move. He barely breathed. He told himself he was dreaming. Sleep paralysis. Hell, he'd read enough about it to know what it was. That thing in the corner wasn't real. Couldn't be, but it smiled at him. He saw teeth. Too many. Too wide. He shut his eyes and didn't open them again until dawn. The third night he drank himself stupid to try and keep from waking up at all. Passed out on top of the covers with the light on and the door cracked open. Didn't matter. Somewhere, around 3 a.m, he felt the bed shift. The way it does when someone sits down slow, careful, so they don't wake you. Except he wasn't asleep anymore. He was wide awake, too afraid to move, too afraid to open his eyes because he could feel the weight of whoever, whatever, had settled itself beside him. It breathed, slow, wet, like lungs filled with swamp water. Like it took effort, and it leaned in close enough he could feel the cold press of its mouth at his ear and the weight of words that weren't words at all. Not a language he knew. Not a language anybody living ought to speak. But he understood it all the same. Stay. It didn't sound like a request. In the morning, the key lady called to ask if everything was all right. Sighed she noticed his truck hadn't moved. Sighed she liked to check in. He told her he was fine. Told her he'd be leaving tomorrow. She didn't argue. Just said, that room doesn't like to be empty too long, you know? That's how it gets. Lonely. That night, Lyle tried sleeping downstairs on the couch. Brought his blanket, his pillow, a glass of whiskey clutched like a rosary, but he couldn't make it stick. Somewhere past midnight, he woke up standing at the foot of the stairs, one hand on the banister, the other reaching for the light switch without knowing why. The door to the room was open. He was halfway inside before he realized he'd moved. At all, the thing in the corner was closer now, not hiding, not pretending. It sat on the bed, head tilted, watching him like it had been waiting, and the smile never broke. The next morning, Lyle packed his things, left the key on the counter with a note that just said, "Sorry." He didn't bother cleaning up, didn't bother turning off the lights. He drove away without looking back, without stopping, without thinking about the way his reflection in the rear view kept flickering like something else was trying to get through. They say no one sleeps through the night in that room. They say everyone sees it, sooner or later, everyone feels it. That's why folks don't talk much about it, not in detail. They all say the same thing. They weren't alone in there. They never are. It was a cheap little roadside place that barely showed up on Google Maps. One of those motels where the sign's been half lit. For so long, it looks more like a threat than an invitation. Most people only stopped there because they were too tired to keep going or too broke to care where they laid down for the night. The room smelled like mildew. The walls were thin enough to hear the next door guest breathing, and the ice machine outside the office hadn't worked since the early 90s. The couple checked in just after 10, a man and a woman. He looked rough around the edges, like he hadn't slept in days, with grease under his fingernails and a mean cut on his knuckle. She looked worse, thin, pale, twitchy, kept her head down, said nothing. The manager on duty that night, Luis handed over the key card without asking questions. He'd learned not to get involved with the types of people who pass through, especially couples, especially ones like this. They took room 7, the farthest from the office, near the busted soda machine where kids had carved their names into the plastic. Luis didn't see them again. Nobody did. Morning came, checkout time passed. The cleaning crew went in. Norma was first through the door, vacuum in one hand, cart squeaking behind her. She noticed right away the room smelled wrong, not just cigarettes and mold, but something sharp, coppery, like an old coin held too long in the mouth. Still, she moved through her routine. Bed stripped, sheets bundled, towels gone. Nothing out of place except a shattered glass in the bathroom sink, like someone had been careless with it. Then she looked up at the mirror. Red letters scrawled across the glass, smeared by a trembling finger. At first she thought, paint. Some kind of prank. Kids maybe, though no kids had checked in. But the smell? Norma knew blood when she smelled it. She'd raised 3 boys, cleaned more skinned knees and bloody noses than she could count. This wasn't paint. She dropped the vacuum handle and stepped back into the room, heart racing, eyes darting to the door as if someone might still be hiding there, waiting to see her reaction. But the room was empty, silent. The AC unit buzzed weakly under the window. She leaned forward, reading the words, fighting the urge to run screaming for the office. "We can't leave. He won't let us. Help us." Norma left the room without finishing her job. Left the cart right there in the doorway. Went straight to Luis, who rolled his eyes at first until he smelled it too. They called the cops. By the time the sun was sinking low behind the gas station across the highway, there were uniforms crawling all over the place. They photographed the mirror, scraped samples, looked for fingerprints. They found nothing. Not on the doorknob, not on the glass, not even on the walls or TV remote. Like the couple had worn gloves the whole time. They ran the room's keycard history. The couple had entered once. No exit recorded. The bed had been slept in, one side only. The pillows bore the faint shape of a head, strands of hair clinging to the pillowcase. Blonde. The woman's, presumably. The man's belongings were gone: wallet, keys, phone, hers too. No sign of forced entry, no sign of violence except the blood on the mirror. Security cameras showed them arriving. Walking together across the lot, the man holding a small overnight bag. They showed nothing else. No departure. No return. The hallway cam outside their door glitched that night static from midnight until 5:17 a.m. When it flickered back on, revealing an empty corridor, Louise got nervous after that. Started sleeping in the office with the lights on, locking the front door after dark and pretending not to hear the knocking that came sometimes around 2, soft and polite, like a guest wanting to check in late. The mirror stayed in the evidence locker for months before the department quietly dropped the case. No bodies, no crime scene beyond a handful of words written in drying blood. No sign of the couple ever existing except for a false name on the registry and a stolen credit card number that dead-ended in Alabama. Norma quit. Said she wouldn't clean rooms anymore where people vanished into thin air. The next cleaning lady lasted 3 days before she walked off the job, refusing to explain why. Louise finally sold the place. Some franchise bought it up, slapped a new sign on the roof, repainted the doors bright blue like that could erase what had happened there. Room 7 stayed locked. Management told staff it was being renovated, but no work crews ever went in or out. Sometimes, late at night, the lights behind the curtain flicker on, just for a moment. A shape moves past the window. A silhouette, sometimes two. A man and a woman arguing in whispers too soft to hear. And if you press your ear to the door, hold your breath, and listen real close through the crack, you might just hear a voice say, "We can't leave. He won't let us. Help us." It started with something small, as these things always do. A comment on an online rental listing for a little duplex in a nowhere part of East Texas, near Marshall or Jefferson, somewhere between the crumbling railroad lines and the woods that crowd up close to the cracked streets. Nice house. Quiet neighborhood. But there's this man, tall, pale. Never says anything, just stands there. At first, people thought it was a joke. Some creepy inside thing between the former tenants, maybe. One of those dumb urban legends that grows legs on the internet and stumbles around scaring people for no reason. But then, more people mentioned it. Reviews from different years, different people. Always the same words. Tall, silent, pale. Sometimes they said he was in the living room when they woke up. Sometimes they said he was there when they moved in, standing quietly in the corner by the window, watching. No one could ever explain how he got in. Locks weren't broken. Doors weren't open. No signs of forced entry. And when people moved out, they said he stayed behind, watching. The place was cheap. That's what finally got me. I didn't believe in ghost stories. I figured it was either made up or maybe some homeless nut sneaking in and out through a loose floorboard. Either way, I needed somewhere quiet to write, and the landlord was practically begging me to take it. Said he was tired of the turnover. Told me I'd get it for half the rent if I didn't bother him with any weird stories. The house wasn't much. Small, square, peeling beige paint with a yard that backed up to a drainage ditch and woods beyond. You could hear frogs and bugs at night, loud as hell. Inside it smelled faintly of mildew no matter how much I cleaned. The living room had this big, ugly window that faced the street, and the corner next to it had a weird dark patch on the wall, like water damage or smoke stains. That's where everyone said he stood. Right there. First night, nothing happened. I drank a beer, listened to a little music, went to bed early. Same the second night. Third night, I thought I heard something. A creak maybe, soft, like a step on old wood. But when I checked, the room was empty. That stain in the corner seemed darker though, like it had spread a little. I didn't see him until the fourth night. I woke up around 3. Just snapped awake like my body knew something wasn't right. I didn't hear anything this time. I just felt it. That crawling, skin-tight feeling like someone's eyes are on you. I sat up, looked out my bedroom door down the short hall to the living room. The streetlight outside threw this ugly yellow shape through the window, stretching shadows long and black across the carpet. He was standing in the corner, tall, pale, thin in a way that didn't look natural, like he'd been stretched. His head almost touched the ceiling. He didn't move, didn't breathe, as far as I could tell. Just stood there, half in the shadow, half in that watery streetlight. His face wasn't right. Long, smooth, no real features I could make out, except maybe where his eyes should have been, dark dense, like thumb presses into clay. I sat there for a long time, just staring, waiting for him to do something. He didn't. I finally worked up the nerve to get out of bed and step down the hall. I didn't speak. I don't know why, but it felt wrong to speak. Like words wouldn't work right in front of him. When I got close enough, I reached out, stupidly, like touching him would prove he wasn't real. My hand passed right through. Cold. That's what I remember most. Like sticking your arm into a freezer full of ice fog. It burned going through, burned worse pulling back. He didn't react. He just watched. Or maybe not watched. It's hard to explain. He didn't have eyes, not really. But I felt him watching. I went back to bed. Don't ask me why. What else was I supposed to do? Call the cops? Tell them a ghost was loitering in my rental? I pulled the covers over my head like a scared kid and eventually fell asleep. In the morning, he was gone. It kept happening. Some nights he'd be there. Some nights he wouldn't. Always the same spot. Always the same silence. After a while, I started talking to him. Just to hear myself, to feel less crazy. Told him about my writing, my shitty childhood, my worst relationships, my debts, my regrets. He never moved, never made a sound. But I think he listened. Weird thing was, the longer I stayed, the less afraid I felt. Not comfortable exactly, but used to him. Like having a dog that never barks. Just there, watching. I stopped going out. Much. Friends would text, ask if I was okay. I'd lie, say I was busy, deep in work. Truth was, I didn't want to leave the house. I didn't want to leave him. Something about him felt tied to me now, like if I walked too far away, he'd follow. Or worse, wait, and grow hungry. One night, I came home late. Car broke down on the highway, and I had to walk 5 miles in the dark to get back. Whole time I felt something behind me, just out of sight. A tall shape in the trees, in the ditches, reflections in the puddles. When I finally got to the door, my key shook in my hand, but not from fear. From cold. The air around the house was wrong. Like winter had settled just on my yard. Inside, he was waiting. Not in the corner this time, in my chair. Watching the door like he'd been waiting for me to come home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat across from him, watching him watch me. Until dawn, and I realized something then. He wasn't just a ghost. Wasn't just some leftover scrap of sadness or tragedy bound to the house. He was a door. Or maybe a crack in the wall between things. A place where something else could look through. And the more I looked back, the wider that crack got. I started seeing others, in mirrors and windows, behind me in reflections. Pale faces, pale hands pressed to glass, watching, silent, waiting. People stopped coming by. Even the landlord. Mail piled up. My phone stopped ringing. I didn't mind. I had him. My pale, silent companion. My anchor. My witness. I don't write anymore. Words don't come easy now. Feels like they're not mine to use. Feels like speaking. Too much would draw them closer, would make the crack wider, would let more of them in. I sit in the living room most days. In the other chair now, watching him, watching the corner, watching the stains spread a little more each night. Sometimes, I wonder what the next tenant will think when they read the old reviews. I wonder if they'll understand faster than I did. Wonder if they'll see me standing, watching, never speaking. It was one of those houses that seemed to breathe when the wind picked up, the kind with bones deep in the soil and a smell like old stone soaked through with damp. The owner, a woman named Denise who had inherited it from her father's side of the family, kept it going as a rental on and off, mostly to folks passing through or grad students trying to finish their dissertations in peace. Nothing flashy. It wasn't the sort of house you booked because you wanted modern comforts. It was the sort of place you booked because something in the photos pulled at you in a way you couldn't quite explain. That was what this man said. Anyway, when he first showed up. His name was Carl. Middle-aged, quiet voice, polite in a way that seemed both deliberate and unnatural. Denise remembered how he smiled too wide when she handed him the keys and said the usual bit about text. Me if you need anything. The thing about Carl wasn't just the way he kept asking about the basement. It was how he asked. Not like someone making conversation. Not like someone interested in the architecture or wondering if the foundation leaked. He asked like he was testing her. Like he already knew something and wanted to see if she'd lie. First, it was small things. Had it always been there? That basement? Had the stairs always been wood? Did it smell strange after a heavy rain? And then more specific questions, ones that made her skin crawl after dark. Had anything ever been sealed down there? Not stored. Sealed. The way he looked at her when he said it, Denise had to force herself to laugh like it was a harmless little quirk. You mean like wine or pickles? She'd said. He didn't laugh back. No, he said, soft as breath. I mean something else. She didn't ask what. Some people are like that. They want to chase their weird little obsessions into dark corners, and if you let them, it's their business. She figured he was harmless, though. Harmless people didn't ask too many questions. Not unless they were lonely, but Carl wasn't lonely. Not in the way normal people get lonely, anyway. He didn't leave the house after he checked in. Not once. Denise drove past twice a day because it was on her way to work and she'd catch glimpses of him through the sheer curtains in the sitting room. Sitting there for hours, staring at the same corner of the ceiling like he expected something to drip down out of it. Once, late at night, she thought she saw him standing out on the lawn barefoot, looking down toward the slope of the yard where the basement windows stared back like eyes half sunk in earth. The grass hadn't grown right there in years. The texts started on his second night. Do you know how thick the walls are? He wrote at 2:30 a.m. Do you know if it's possible to hear voices through that much concrete? She ignored that one. Next day, has anyone ever opened the part behind the furnace? And then, did your father tell you what was left behind down there, or did he keep it from you too? That one stopped her cold. She deleted it without replying, though it stayed in the back of her mind all day like a worm tunneling through soft wood. Because the thing was, she didn't know. Not really. Her father never talked about it. Not even when he got sick. Not even when she had to go down there herself to change out the filters or chase out the possums that sometimes squeezed through the broken window well. She'd always kept her head down, flashlight aimed ahead, never to the corners. It felt rude, somehow. Like looking too closely would wake something best left sleeping. On the fourth night, she drove by again and noticed all the lights were on. Basement too. That bothered her. The switch for the basement was in the hall upstairs, not below. Meaning he'd been down there and come back up in the dark to turn it on. Meaning he'd stood in that space longer than anyone had in years, just breathing it in. When she pulled over and sat watching the house through the windshield, she thought, She saw him again, this time pressed right up against the glass in the front window, staring out not at her but at the basement windows again, like he couldn't help himself. She told herself to let it be. A grown man in a house he'd paid. To stay in was no business of hers. But that night she dreamed of her father, pale and coughing up black water onto the kitchen linoleum, pointing at the basement door with his ruined hands and whispering, "It's still down there, still waiting." She woke up shaking, heart galloping. Against her ribs. Morning brought no relief. Carl hadn't texted, hadn't called. She thought maybe he'd left early, packed up and gone without saying. It happened sometimes with renters. They got spooked by the house's silence, the way. Time felt thick here, like syrup slowing everything down. But when she drove past, his car was still there, same spot. Windows fogged over from the inside. By noon, she cracked. Told herself she'd stop in, do the polite thing. Welfare check, that's all. She had a key. She let herself in slow, calling. His name like she meant it casual. "Carl, you all right in here? Just wanted to check in." No answer. The air was wrong. Not stale exactly. It smelled freshly opened, like something had been unsealed. Cold, wet stone. Rust. Beneath that, something older. Something that tickled the back of her throat with the taste of grave dirt. She found him downstairs. Not. Right away. First, she had to work up the nerve to even open the basement door. It was ajar when she found it, light pooling up weakly from below like breath rising through a cracked coffin. The stairs groaned under her weight, boards damp beneath. Her shoes, though it hadn't rained in weeks. Halfway down she heard it, not voices, not really. A sound like a mouth opening wide in hunger. A sound like soil shifting beneath a lid of concrete. Carl stood in the far corner by the furnace, bare feet black with old soot, his hands pressed flat to the wall where a faint seam ran like a scar. His head tilted, listening to something she couldn't hear, couldn't understand. His eyes rolled back white, mouth working silently around words she didn't want to know. Beneath his feet, the floor pulsed. Just once, like something knocking back, she ran, not fast enough. He turned as she hit the stairs and said, "You should have told me what your father did." His voice wasn't his anymore. Denise locked the dinfas. Door behind her. Nailed it shut. Called a man she knew who owed her favors and told him to board the basement windows from outside, good and tight. Told him to seal up the door with more than nails. Told him not to ask questions, and he didn't. Some folks around here still remembered her father. Carl's car stayed in the driveway for 3 more days before it was gone. Just gone, not driven away. No tracks on the gravel, no cameras catching the exit. Gone like a light winking out. Like something finally answered his knocking and took him inside where walls don't end and stairs don't lead back up. Denise doesn't rent the place anymore. When people ask, she says she's thinking of selling, but she won't. Not really. You don't sell a house like that. You tend it. You keep it quiet. You make sure nothing down there gets too curious again. And you stop looking at the basement windows when the wind picks up and the ground shifts beneath your feet. She arrived in the fall, just as the leaves started to turn brittle and yellow and the air took on that dry, hollow smell that seemed to seep straight out of the bones of the old town. Nobody really noticed her at first. She kept to herself, stayed quiet, paid her rent in cash every Monday morning at the corner office of the dusty little boarding house on Sycamore Street. The old woman who ran the place, Mrs. Halberd, told anyone who asked that her new tenant was polite, clean, and paid on time, which in a place like that, where tenants tended to vanish without paying or stayed so long they rotted into the furniture, meant something. The only thing that marked the woman out as strange, at first, anyway, was the doll. It wasn't the kind of doll you give a child. It wasn't plastic. It wasn't soft. It wasn't cute. It was porcelain, bone pale, with glassy blue eyes and tight golden curls and a mouth like a wound painted onto its face. A doll out of time. The woman carried it everywhere, tucked under her arm when she went down the stairs, sitting next to her at the diner when she ordered black coffee she never drank, cradled in her lap on the days she sat on the sagging front porch as dusk fell, her thumb stroking the thing's stiff little cheek like it might cry if she stopped. The town talked, of course. How could they not? That's what towns like that do. And soon enough the whispers started. First it was Mrs. Halberd herself, telling her sister over the phone that she could swear she'd seen the doll turn its head when the woman wasn't looking. Then it was Betty Wilkes, who lived across the street, saying she'd passed by one afternoon and glanced up and seen the doll standing in the window, pressed against the glass, looking down at her with those blank eyes. Then it was the kids, daring each other to run up to the porch, to knock on the door, to peek through the curtains at night when the lights inside burned dim and flickered like candle flames. Nobody ever said much to the woman herself. She wasn't unfriendly, exactly, but there was something about her that made people keep their distance. She spoke in a soft, careful way, like words were heavy things she had to weigh before letting them go. She dressed in faded dresses that hung off her, like they'd been made for someone thinner, smaller. Her hair was always pinned up, neat and tight. No one ever saw her laugh. No one ever saw her cry either. She wasn't young, but she wasn't old. Somewhere in between, caught in a place where time didn't seem to matter anymore. People started noticing things. Small things at first. The porch light burning long past midnight even though no one ever came or went. The radio in her room playing old music, scratchy and low, even though she'd left hours ago. A shadow at the window when she wasn't home. Sometimes two shadows. Sometimes the shape of something small, with a round little head and pointed. Fingers tapping at the glass dot. Then came the night the boy disappeared. Tommy Keller, 9 years old. Lived 2 streets over, spent most afternoons kicking a ball up and down the cracked pavement with the other neighborhood kids. He was the one who said he was going to prove the doll moved. Said he'd seen it blink at him once when he passed by and he wasn't scared. Said he was going to sneak into her yard, press his face right up to the glass and catch it on video. His friends dared him, of course. That's what kids do. Dared him right up until sunset, when Tommy walked down Sycamore Street alone, clutching his mother's old cell phone with a cracked screen, determined to be brave. No one saw him after that. The police came, asked questions, looked through her house. They found nothing. No trace of Tommy. No sign of a struggle. Nothing out of place except the doll, sitting primly in the middle of the unmade bed, staring straight ahead like it always did. The woman stood in the doorway, her pale hands folded over each other, and said in that soft, careful voice that she didn't know what they were talking about. That she'd been out all evening. That she didn't know any little boy. They believed her. Or at least they had no reason not to, but people talked more after that. Kids stopped walking down Sycamore altogether. Betty Wilkes put up new curtains, thick ones, so she wouldn't have to see that upstairs window anymore. Mrs. Halberd told her sister she'd taken to locking her bedroom door at night, though she couldn't say why. And then it happened again. A man this time. Carl Pritchard, mid-30s, worked nights loading trucks, drank too much, loud with his hands. Came home drunk one morning and decided to give her a piece of his mind because she'd looked at him wrong the day before. Pounded on her door until it splintered under his fists. She didn't answer. The door creaked open on its own. He went. Inside. No one saw Carl Pritchard again either. His truck sat in the driveway for 2 days before anyone thought to check. When they did, the house was empty. No sign of the woman. No sign of Carl. Just the doll sitting on the porch swing, its little porcelain hands folded primly in its lap, its painted mouth turned up just a fraction more than anyone remembered. That's when Mrs. Halberd finally had enough. Called in a preacher from out of town, said she didn't care if people thought she was crazy. The preacher came and walked through the house with his Bible in one hand and a bottle of holy water in the other. He said he felt something in there. Said the air was thick like breathing through wet cloth. Said he heard whispers, soft and hungry, coming from the walls. He blessed every room, every corner, every window and door. And then he left, pale and shaking, and told Mrs. Halberd to burn the place down. But she didn't. Of course she didn't. This is the kind of town where people survive by pretending. Things are normal until they're not anymore. The woman came. Back 3 nights later, just walked right up the steps like she'd never been gone, picked up the doll from the porch swing and tucked it under her arm like a baby. Went inside. Locked the door. Turned on the light in the upstairs window. People said the doll waved that night. Time passed. More people went missing. Not all at once. Not in any pattern. A girl from the next county who'd gotten lost on her way home. A salesman who'd taken the wrong exit. A stray dog. A stray cat. Shadows in the alley behind the house, moving wrong. Voices late at night, giggling like children but sharp, mean somehow by the time winter came, Sycamore Street was nearly empty. Houses boarded up, lawns overgrown. No one walked that side of town anymore. Mrs. Halberd moved in with her sister. Betty Wilkes packed up and left in the middle of the night. The diner closed. The lights burned on in that upstairs window, steady. As a heartbeat, they say she's still there, still quiet, still careful, still carrying that doll wherever she goes. They say the doll's face changes sometimes, softens or hardens depending on who's looking. They say you can hear scratching from inside the house, soft and slow, like tiny hands on glass. They say if you get too close, you'll see faces, pressed up behind the curtains. Faces you might recognize. They say the woman is looking for something, or someone. And until she finds it, she won't leave, and neither will the doll. It was one of those old houses out near the edge of town, the kind you drive past and don't think twice about unless you're in the market for something cheap and quiet. The paint had peeled off decades ago, but the bones of it were strong, thick. Brick and timber sunk deep into the clay earth, settled long enough that the place seemed half swallowed by the land itself. It wasn't a fancy rental. It wasn't meant to be. Just a stopover for traveling salesmen, divorcees waiting out paperwork, or the rare writer looking to disappear into themselves for a week or two. Marion had been running it as a short-term rental for 3 years, and in that time, nothing strange had happened. Nothing worth talking about anyway. Until the man who called himself James Booker checked in. He'd booked 5 nights, paid in full upfront. A polite man, maybe in his 40s, clean-shaven with hair going silver at the sides, driving a rental with out-of-state plates. He said he was a journalist working on a book. Said he wanted quiet and nothing else. He barely asked a question during the tour. Didn't even blink at the rules about the cellar door staying locked or the useless fireplace that hadn't drawn smoke right since the 80s. Just smiled, nodded, carried his single suitcase inside, and that was that. Marion didn't hear from him the whole stay. No calls, no texts. The driveway stayed empty except for his rental. Curtains drawn, porch light off. Not a soul in town knew him. She figured he was holed up writing, the way some of them do, shutting the world out until they've bled the words dry. His checkout date came and went without a word. No message. No key left in the box. That's when Marion drove out herself. Annoyed but not suspicious, just expecting the usual someone sleeping late, someone hungover, someone trying to squeeze out another unpaid night. What she found instead was every door in the house locked tight. Not just the front, not just the back. Every interior door. Bedroom, bathroom, even the hall closet. Locked from the inside. Bolted, latches set. And no one answered when she knocked. Not a sound inside, not a footstep, not a cough. The curtains still drawn, the porch light still dead. The car still there. She walked the perimeter twice, tried the windows. Nailed shut, as always. That's how the place was. Old habits of the old owners. She called out. She waited. Nothing. No lights flickered on, no shadows moved behind the glass. It didn't make sense. The doors inside could only be locked manually from within each room. There were no skeleton keys, no tricks to them. Someone had gone through that house and locked themselves into every space like they were barricading against something. But why? And how did they leave? Finally, she forced the front door open with her spare key. The living room was clean. Too clean. The couch cushions untouched. The TV remote right where she'd left it last. Not even a coffee cup out of place. She knocked on the first door bathroom and, of course, locked. She jimmied it with a butter knife from the kitchen and got it open. Empty. Tub dry. Mirror wiped clear. No sign of steam or recent use, same with the guest room. Locked from the inside. Empty. Fresh sheets. Closet door bolted from within, but again, nothing inside but dust and hangers. It was like the man had gone room to room, methodically locking up behind him, sealing off space after space, and then, what? Vanished? The bedroom he'd slept in was the worst. It felt cold in there. Colder than the house had any right to be, given the heat outside. The curtains drawn tight as fists. The bed made. Not just made, but made precisely, corners sharp, pillows squared. The way a hotel maid might do, not a guest. His suitcase was on the floor by the dresser, zipped shut. Inside, only clothes. Neatly folded, pressed, unworn. Not a single dirty sock. No toiletries in the bathroom either. Toothbrush still in its package. Razor untouched. Soap bar dry and clean. It was like he'd unpacked for show and never really stayed. But he had stayed. She knew he had in the knitstand drawer a single thing. The house key. The one he was supposed to leave in the box outside. No note, no sign of him. Just the key, sitting there like it had been waiting. She unlocked the last door small linen closet off the hall, also bolted from within. Nothing inside but folded sheets. Clean, silent, stale dot at that point. Marion did something she hadn't done since she'd bought the place. She checked the crawl space beneath the house. Latch still set. Padlock rusted shut, untouched. No footprints in the dirt. Nothing disturbed. Same with the attic. No signs of nesting animals. No piles of belongings. No secret hobo camp like you sometimes heard about. Clean, silent, empty. The rental car sat where it had all week. Keys in the ignition, tank full. Registration in the glove box. Not a speck of dust on the dash. Rental paperwork in the name of James Booker, but the license was a problem. Louisiana issued, yes. Photo ID, yes. But the issue date was last month, and the man in the picture wasn't the man who checked in. Same name. Same birth date. Different face entirely. She called the sheriff. They came out, did a walkthrough, frowned at the locked doors, shrugged at the clean sheets, asked her if she'd been drinking. Said maybe he left in the night and someone else locked up after. Except who? And how? No footprints. No tire tracks beyond his own. Nothing on the cameras except him arriving, and then nothing. No one else. Not a shadow, not a car, nothing. They had the car towed eventually, hauled it down to impound. The house sat empty another week before Marion worked up the nerve to air it out. That's when she noticed the scratches inside the doors. Deep gouges, low down, where hands might scrabble if you were trapped inside and trying to claw your way free. Not fresh, old, faint, almost worn smooth by time. Beneath the layers of paint and varnish. Like they'd always been there, waiting for someone to notice, she stopped renting it after that. Sold it cheap to a couple from Houston who said they liked old houses, didn't mind a fixer-upper. Last Marion heard, they moved out after 6 months. Complained of locked doors, cold rooms, sounds at night. Things disappearing, reappearing. One morning they found every window in the house sealed tight from the inside, every door bolted, keys missing. Took them hours to get out. They said they never saw the man himself, but sometimes they heard him. Footsteps moving room to room, keys turning, doors closing, locking, always locking. The first thing that struck Dale Harper about the old house on Belton Street wasn't how empty it felt or how the walls seemed to breathe if you listened just right. It was the light, or more specifically, the lack of it. His realtor, a worn-out woman who smelled of menthols and wore shoes with run-down heels, had warned him with a shrug that the last tenant had been a bit of a weirdo about things. Dale thought nothing of it at the time. He was newly divorced, tired, and looking for cheap rent. Weirdness didn't scare him anymore. It didn't even register. What did register, though, was that when he moved in, every light bulb in the place had been carefully, almost lovingly, unscrewed and set aside in neat little stacks in each room, as if whoever lived there before wanted to make sure no light got in accidentally. Curtains were drawn and pinned shut with thumbtacks. Layers of fabric overlapped to deny even the suggestion of sunlight. Beneath each window, Dale found black electrical tape reinforcing the seams. Even the peephole in the front door had been sealed from the inside with a square of duct tape. At first, Dale thought it was a joke, or maybe paranoia. But after 3 days in the house, he began to wonder if it was something else entirely. The air inside never seemed to move. The HVAC rattled and wheezed but did nothing. A faint smell clung to everything: dust, mildew, and something beneath that, something sour. The shadows in the corners looked thicker than they should. At night, even with his own lamps brought in and plugged up, the light didn't seem to push far beyond the bulbs. It was during the first proper grocery run when Dale finally opened the fridge to clear out whatever had been left behind that things tipped from unsettling to wrong. Inside the fridge, stacked with unsettling precision between plastic containers of expired milk and a butter dish caked with mold, were dozens of Polaroid photographs. Each photo showed parts of the house: corners of ceilings, baseboards, the underside of the stairs. Always grainy, always washed in darkness, like the flash had barely been enough to slice a sliver of detail from the black. Dale flipped through them, his unease growing. Some angles didn't make sense, like they'd been taken from places no human could comfortably fit. Behind radiators, beneath the floorboards. Looking up from within air vents, no people in any of them. No faces peeking from shadows. Just the house itself, captured again and again as if to prove something invisible was really there. Dale shoved the photos into a drawer and tried to forget them. But forgetting became harder when he started hearing the footsteps. It was soft at first, barely noticeable over the hum of his laptop late at night. A scuff against floorboards, a shuffle across carpet. He told himself it was the house settling or neighborhood cats prowling beneath the crawl space. But then it came again, and again, always just beyond the reach of light, always where the dark pressed hardest against the edges of rooms. One night, after too much bourbon and too little sleep, Dale called out into the darkness, "I live here." "Now," he said, "you had your turn. Move on." No answer came. Not in words, but the fridge light went out the next morning. The bulb was gone from its socket, not burnout removed. Set beside the coffee pot like a polite offering. That night Dale stayed up with every light in the house burning. He drank coffee until his hands shook. He locked every door, checked every window. Still, at some awful hour between 2 and 3, the hallway light snapped off with a sharp click. Then the bathroom light. Then the kitchen. Something moved in the dark, slow and deliberate, footsteps muffled against old carpet. Dale sat frozen. In his chair in the living room, watching the yellow glow from his reading lamp stretch smaller and smaller as the darkness gathered itself around him like a living thing. The next day he found fresh Polaroids shoved beneath his bedroom door. These showed the living room as it had been hours before, him asleep in his chair, mouth slack, bourbon bottle on the floor. In the corner of each photo, just behind him, a shape lingered. Tall, narrow, blending almost perfectly into shadow except for its teeth. The teeth gleamed white in the camera flash, wide and too many for a human mouth. Dale tried leaving. Packed a suitcase and made it as far as his car. But the engine wouldn't turn over. His phone stayed at zero signal even though he could see the neighboring rooftops from the driveway. When he turned back toward the house, the front door stood open, dark, and waiting. Another photo on the welcome mat. A fresh one, taken from the threshold, looking inward. Dale could see himself standing there at the curb, suitcase in hand, watching. He went back inside. Days blurred. Time slipped loose. Morning and night became meaningless concepts beneath blackout curtains and taped seams. Dale stopped trying to turn on lights. Stopped looking at his reflection mirrors. Didn't work right in the house anymore. He spoke. Less and less. The house preferred silence. The house listened. Sometimes he heard it breathing. Sometimes he thought he heard it laugh. He found himself taking photos. He didn't remember buying a Polaroid camera, but there it was on the kitchen table one morning beside a stack of fresh film. He took pictures of corners, of cracks, of darkness behind door frames. He pinned them to the fridge. He added more every night. His hands moved without him. His eyes adjusted to the dark. One evening, long after he stopped counting days, Dale noticed something new in the photos. The shape had grown closer. No longer lurking in the edge of frames, it stood behind him, over him, beside him as he slept. Its hands, long and thin, now rested on his shoulders in each new shot. When the last bulb vanished, and the last sliver of daylight bled away beneath layers of fabric and tape, Dale didn't mind. He sat in the dark, camera in hand, clicking photos into the silence. He smiled, and the teeth behind him smiled too. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, more film waited. Somewhere behind the walls, footsteps paced. The house had found another. One who understood. He would stay. He belonged to the dark now. The house was one of those newly renovated Airbnbs you see pop up around small Texas towns trying to shake off their dust and oil reputations. A little too clean, a little too staged. Fresh gray paint, fake barnwood floors, a Keurig balanced. On a thrift store credenza to give it that home away from home feeling. The host, her name was Jolene, had owned the place about 6 months. It wasn't fancy, but it stayed booked more often than not. Usually older couples from Dallas or people passing through on their way to Austin or Houston. Nothing weird, not. Until that one woman came. She booked for 2 weeks, which was already odd. Most folks stayed a weekend at most. Her profile said her name was Celia. No last name, well there was, but it looked fake. Something like Smithson or Smythe. She was early 40s, polite, neat as a pin, quiet, alone. Jolene met her at check-in, gave her the little speech about the air conditioning and the weird lock on the back door. Celia smiled the whole time, but there was something brittle about her. The kind of smile that looks permanent but feels like glass over something rotten underneath. Jolene told herself not to judge. People booked Airbnbs to get away after all. Lord knew she'd had her own reasons for hiding out once or twice. The first night Jolene heard them arguing, she thought it was the TV. Thin walls in those old houses, especially the ones pretending to be new. A man and a woman snapping at each other like dogs. Him low and growling, her sharp and hot, hurling words like stones. Couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clear enough. Ugly stuff. Jolene almost texted to ask if everything was all right, but thought better of it. None of her business what couples argued about behind closed doors. Except next morning, Celia came out alone. Hair neat. Makeup done. Polite smile back in place. She waved to Jolene like nothing had happened. Jolene watched her get in her little gray Nissan and drive off toward town, calm as could be. No sign of anyone else in the house. Second night, same thing. Worse, maybe. Jolene stood out on her own porch in the dark, smoking and pretending not to listen, but it was impossible not to. The words clearer now, slicing through the stillness like broken glass. You don't talk to me that way. You don't get to? Anymore. Oh, don't I? After everything you did? I left. What more do you want from me? Doors slamming, footsteps pounding. A man's laugh, bitter, cruel. Jolene hugged her arms around herself, cigarette burning down to the filter. She hadn't seen anyone else go in or out. Not once. Just Celia. Alone. By the third night, Jolene stopped pretending not to notice. She sat on her porch swing past midnight with a beer and listened. It was like watching a play through a curtain. The fights got meaner, longer. Sometimes the man shouted things that didn't even sound like words. Deep, guttural snarls, like an animal getting ready to tear something apart. Celia always shouted back. Never crying, never afraid, furious. Raging like a woman possessed, Jolene started leaving the porch light on. Have to reassure herself, have to see if anyone came or went. No one did. Just Celia's car in the drive. Lights off by 2 or 3 a.m., then up early and out again like nothing happened. Polite smiles, small waves. Jolene started wondering if maybe she was being messed with. Some city woman thinking it was funny to freak out the local hick. But Celia didn't seem the type. She seemed worn. Like someone fighting something bigger than she could admit out loud. By the fourth night, Jolene couldn't take it anymore. She waited until the yelling started, same time as always, just after midnight, and marched herself right over. Knocked hard on the door. The yelling stopped dead. Silence poured out through the cracks like smoke. Jolene's hand hovered for a second, her heart kicking like a mule. Then the door opened. Celia stood there, looking pale and tired and not even a little surprised. Everything all right, ma'am? Jolene heard herself ask, polite as church on Sunday. Celia just smiled that brittle smile. Sorry about the noise, she said. Bad dreams, nothing more. Jolene wanted to say she'd heard 2 people. Wanted to ask where the man had gone. But something in Celia's face said don't, not unless you want to know too much. So, Jolene nodded and walked herself back across the dark yard, feeling like she'd been brushed by something cold and unseen. The next morning, Celia was gone. Packed up early, left the key on the table, door locked behind her. House spotless, sheets washed, no note, no review. Just gone. Jolene didn't notice the smell until that evening. Damp, old, like something left too long in a crawl space. It came from the back bedroom, the one Celia had used. She told herself it was just mildew. The house was old, after all, but bleach didn't touch it. Febreze made it worse, like spraying perfume on a corpse. That night, Jolene stayed up late, scrolling through Celia's Airbnb profile again. No reviews, barely any info. Her verified ID was just a driver's license photo, blurry and old. The kind people upload when they don't expect to use the account more than once. Jolene thought about calling someone. The police? About what? A woman renting a house alone wasn't a crime. Neither was yelling at nothing that sleep didn't. Come easy. Around 1 a.m., Jolene thought she heard it again. Not from across the yard this time. From inside her own house. Two voices, low and savage, tearing strips off each other in words she couldn't quite make out. A man's growl. A woman's snarl. I left. You don't get to leave me. You don't get to forget. Jolene sat up in bed, heart hammering. So loud it drowned out the words. She flicked on every light in the house. Nothing there. Doors locked. Windows shut. She didn't sleep. Didn't even try. By dawn, the smell had crept under her door. She sold the house 2 months later. Cheap. Didn't care. Some things you don't want to hold on to. New owners seemed happy enough at first. Young couple, big dreams. Jolene drove past one night not long after they moved in and saw them arguing on the porch. Loud, bitter, the man's face red and ugly in the porch light. The woman's eyes hollow and furious. She didn't drive past again. Some houses remember. Some arguments don't end just because one person leaves. Some people scream and scream and scream, even when there's no one left to answer. It started with the guests. Not the normal kind, not the ones who booked through the app and left. Passive-aggressive reviews about the water pressure or the smell of the swampy Texas heat seeping through the air vents. No, this started with the ones who said things. Little things at first. Polite, confused, nothing accusatory. A question here, a casual remark there. Hey, do you have raccoons in the walls? We kept hearing scratching at night. Is that normal out here? Not to be weird, but it sounded like whispering from inside the walls. You laugh it off at first. That's what I did anyway. I told them about the old pine boards and the way heat makes wood move like something alive. I blamed the wind. I blamed mice. I blamed Texas itself. This part of the state, not far from Galveston, near the marshes, it's got stories. The land sinks a little more every year. Houses groan like they're sorry for still standing. You get used to sounds that don't make sense. But then people stopped asking and started leaving early. I'd get a message at 2 in the morning. Sorry, emergency came up, leaving now, thanks for understanding. I'd drive out in the morning, expecting to find the place empty, maybe a forgotten phone charger tangled in a sheet. But sometimes I'd find more. Things left behind that felt deliberate. An earring jammed deep into the closet wall. A man's watch stuffed between couch cushions, strap broken like it had been yanked. A Bible with the spine snapped, pages torn out one by one and shoved behind the refrigerator. Then there were the scratches. Not the sounds, the marks. Little curls in the paint near the baseboards. Gouges low on the door frames, just above, where your foot might kick if you were crawling, dragging yourself forward. Scratches behind the headboard in the master bedroom. I didn't want to believe it. I painted over them. I fixed the trim. I told myself it was nothing until the Gutierrez family stayed. They were the last ones. Booked a whole week for their son's graduation from UTMB. Left after 2 nights. When I drove out there to check on the place, I found their bags still in the bedrooms. Half-packed, like they started and couldn't finish. Food left in the fridge, untouched. Car still in the driveway. I called the number on the booking. No answer. Next day, cops showed up, towed the car, said the family flew home early. That was all. Didn't want to talk about it. I went through the house slower this time. Really looked. Noticed how cold it felt, like the air conditioning was running too. Hard even though it wasn't on. I found long, pale hairs on the pillows. Nobody in that family had hair that color. I found scratch marks under the kitchen sink, inside the cabinet where no one had any reason to go. I found teeth marks on the door jamb. Small, human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too narrow. Too deep. It made me sick, realizing what those marks meant. Someone was living in my house. Not just staying, not breaking in and leaving. Living. Between the walls. The crawl space ran narrow between the first and second floors. Just enough room for plumbing, wiring, rats maybe. Not enough for a person, I thought. Not unless they were willing to suffer for it. Not unless they'd been doing it so long their body didn't remember standing up. I pulled back the drywall. In the utility closet first. Hands shaking, heart pounding like a kid scared of the dark. Behind the drywall, there was space. More than there should have been. A hollow running the length of the house, black as a swallowed scream. In it. I found blankets, rotten thin as spiderwebs. Food wrappers, not modern, not fresh. Wrappers from brands that stopped existing 10, 15 years ago. A toothbrush chewed down to the plastic. And bones, not human bones. Possum, squirrel, bird maybe, picked clean. Arranged in little circles. Like someone was trying to make art out of hunger. Further in, teeth marks on the studs. Deep grooves. Places where fingers had scraped down to splinters. I stopped breathing when I saw the stains. Dark brown, old. Handprints pressed against the inside of the wall. Nails embedded in soft wood like claws. And then the noise started. Not outside. Not beneath my feet. From inside the wall right next. To my head. A slow sucking breath. A drag of skin on wood. Nails clicking softly, patiently, rhythmically. Like someone waiting to be noticed. Like someone who thought this house still belonged to them. I backed out. Sealed it up. Didn't tell anyone. Put the house up for sale. But at night, in the apartment where I stay now, I hear it. In the drywall between my bed and the neighbors. A faint scratching. A whisper I can't quite make out. Something about hunger. About patience. About how long it can wait. I don't open the walls anymore. I just listen. And try not to answer. The house sat at the edge of a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Dallas, just far enough from the highway that you couldn't hear the traffic, but close enough for the occasional scream of a freight train in the distance to remind you that civilization still existed. It was one of those suburban homes that looked newer than it really was, built maybe in the mid-90s but remodeled a handful of times to keep up appearances. The lawn was tidy, the shutters painted a friendly shade of blue, the welcome mat freshly. Bought from some Hobby Lobby clearance bin. From the outside, it was the kind of place you wouldn't think twice about. Not beautiful, not ugly, just. The man who rented it showed up in early April, driving a dark gray Chevy Malibu with New Mexico plates. The paint on the hood faded like it had been sunburned too many times. The neighbors didn't notice him at first because no one really notices the renters anymore. Airbnb had turned even the friendliest neighborhoods into revolving doors of strangers. But after the first week, a few of them started to notice. Not because he caused trouble or threw loud parties. Quite the opposite. He never left the house, not once. The car sat there in the driveway like some parked relic, gathering a fine coat of yellow pollen. Every few days, food deliveries arrived, groceries from Walmart, takeout from Wingstop, pizza, Chinese, even once or twice those creepy meal prep kits in cardboard boxes. The bags and boxes would stack up by the door. At first, delivery drivers knocked politely, waited a moment, then shrugged and left. After a while, they just dropped the food and walked off without bothering. No one ever came out to greet them. One neighbor, an older man named Billy who spent too much time on his front porch pretending to read the newspaper, started keeping a casual eye on things. He swore up and down he never once saw so much as a shadow pass by the windows. No lights turned on at night. No trash cans rolled out to the curb. The grass didn't grow enough to need mowing, but the hedges started to creep a little wild. Billy mentioned it one morning over coffee with his wife, half joking, half not, that maybe the fella inside was dead and rotting in there. His wife didn't laugh. Neither did he. The property manager, some woman who lived up in Frisco and barely knew the place herself, wasn't much help. When another neighbor finally called to check on things, she waved it off with a brisk, "He's a long-term rental, paid through August. As long as the check clears, he's probably just keeping." To himself. Which would have been fine if not for the little things people started noticing, like how sometimes, just after sunset, you could see a light on upstairs for a minute or two. A soft, pale glow, like someone had turned on an old lamp or maybe lit a candle. It never stayed on long, and it never happened at the same time 2 nights in a row. Or how in the mornings, when the sun hit the front windows just right, you could swear there were smudges on the glass. Handprints. From the inside, Billy said once when he was walking his dog past the house, he heard something. Not a voice. Exactly, more like a low humming sound, steady and strange, vibrating in his chest like a tuning fork pressed to bone. He didn't linger. Neither did the dog. Weeks stretched into months. Spring turned to the sticky heat of summer. The mail piled up, then stopped altogether. The groceries kept coming. Sometimes the drivers would leave the bags on top of the old ones. Milk spoiled, meat rotted, cardboard blackened with mold beneath plastic bags that still held bright red. Apples and boxes of cereal. No one cleaned it up. A kid from down the street dared his buddy to go knock one evening just to see. The boy crept up to the door, knocked once, then leaned close like he was listening for movement. He didn't hear footsteps, didn't hear breathing. What he did hear, or thought he did, was something soft and wet pressing against the door. From the inside, like someone putting their face to the wood. He ran screaming all the way home. His buddy laughed until he went pale the next morning, realizing the front door now had faint, greasy smears at about face height. The smell came next. Not the sharp, unmistakable rot of death, something worse. A mix of mildew and heat, like a swamp trapped in concrete. It leaked through the cracks of the door frame, the seams of the garage, the tiny slits beneath the siding. You couldn't catch it every day. Some afternoons, it was gone entirely. Other times, it seemed thick enough to taste in the back of your throat that no one could explain why the house never got condemned. Code enforcement came by once. Billy watched the city man walk up with his clipboard, knock, wait, scribble something down, then leave without even peeking through a window. After that, nobody came again. It got harder to look at the house after a while. Something about it seemed wrong. Not wrong like a haunted house on TV with boarded windows and creepy curtains. Wrong like a wound you can't see but know is festering beneath the skin. The blue shutters faded. The lawn died in patches that spread like bruises. Even the birds stopped landing on the gutters. Inside, no one could say for sure what was happening. But late at night, if you passed slow enough with your headlights off and your windows cracked, you might catch a glimpse. Not a person exactly. Not movement. Just something watching. From the upstairs window or pressed against the glass by the door. Sometimes higher up, like from the attic vents where no one should be able to stand. A shape. A face, maybe. Or something close enough to pass for one in the dark. By August, the groceries stopped. The car gathered more dust. A storm came through and knocked out a shutter. tore half the gutter loose. Still, no one went in. Not the property manager, not the neighbors, not the police. Someone new came in September. A different car, different plates. Another rental, maybe. They pulled into the driveway, paused for a long while like they were working up the nerve to get out. They did, eventually. Went up to the door, knocked, waited. When the door opened, it did so slow and careful. The person outside stepped in. The door closed behind them. No one saw them leave. The light upstairs came back the next. Night. So did the smell. And through the glass. Faint and sticky with prints no one wanted to wipe clean, the house watched. The house sat on the edge of a dying Texas town, the kind of place where the gas stations have more boarded-up windows than working pumps, and the convenience. Store clerk eyes you like you're already stealing. The woman who owned the house, Miss Evelyn, had been renting out the guest room through one of those apps the past couple years, ever since her husband finally drank himself into a heart attack. It wasn't much of a place, small, old, creaky, but it stayed clean. And travelers looking for a cheap night off. The highway didn't seem to mind the cracked paint or the faint smell of mildew from the ancient carpet. Evelyn kept to herself. Mostly left little welcome baskets with breath mints and off-brand water bottles, and figured it was honest money for very little work. The man who checked in on Wednesday hadn't been anything special. She couldn't remember his name now, something dull and forgettable, like Brian or Todd or maybe one of those odd ones, Trent or Devin. He was quiet, paid through the app, drove a little gray sedan that looked like it needed an oil change and maybe a few prayers to keep it running. Didn't ask about the town, didn't chat, didn't leave the room much. That suited Evelyn just fine. Quiet renters were the best kind. He stayed 3 nights, never once asked for towels, never once asked for the Wi-Fi password, even though she'd written it down on a little laminated card and left it on the knit stand, just like always. She only really saw him twice once. When she handed him the key, and again when she heard him leaving early that Friday morning, just before dawn. She'd glanced out through the yellowed lace curtains and watched his taillights bleed away into the fog that hung low across the fields that time of year. By noon, she figured it was safe to go in and start cleaning. That's when she noticed the bed. It wasn't just the mattress, everything had been moved. The whole damn bed frame had been shoved half a foot toward the far wall, grinding ugly black gouges into the hardwood as it went. That alone would have pissed her off, but it was what she saw beneath the mattress that stopped her cold. The floorboards were pried up, splintered at the edges like something had been hooked beneath them and wrenched hard. Underneath was a mess of dirt, loose and dark and damp, like it had been clawed out in a hurry. A hole, not some little scrape or shallow dent. A hole big enough to swallow a man. A deep, ugly wound in the earth that went down further than made any kind of sense. At least 6 feet. Maybe more. Evelyn stood there for a long time, just staring, her fingers clutching the cracked door frame so tight her knuckles blanched. The smell coming up from that hole wasn't just dirt. It was older than that, deeper. Like wet roots and something rotted, something left too long in the ground. She thought about calling someone, police maybe, or her nephew who still lived. In town? But what would she even say? Some fool rented a room and dug a damn grave under the bed? Who does that? She told herself she was being dramatic. Maybe it wasn't that deep. Maybe the foundation wasn't as thick as she thought. Maybe the dirt looked darker than it was because the light was bad. She fetched the little flashlight she kept in the junk drawer, the one with the fading batteries, that barely held a beam, and knelt beside the ruin of floorboards. The hole yawned beneath her, swallowing the pale light in an instant. It wasn't just deep, it was smooth too, besides worn like something had been wriggling, twisting through the soil over and over until it had carved a perfect black throat into the earth. Something moved down there. She didn't see it, not exactly. but the dirt shifted just at the edges of the light. Something pulling back, slow and deliberate, slipping further into the dark. Evelyn dropped the flashlight. She didn't even notice. She'd done it until the light vanished with a soft thud, leaving nothing but breathless silence behind. She slammed the bedroom door shut and locked it. Stood there with her heart pounding in her ears like the thunder that sometimes rolled in from the west, shaking the windows and rattling the picture frames. She could hear something now, faint beneath the floorboards, a soft scraping. Like nails, like claws, like teeth working patiently against wood and dirt alike. That night she didn't sleep, didn't dare. She sat in the old recliner in the living room with all the lights on and the TV volume low, not watching it, just letting it fill the silence with something human. Around 2 a.m, she heard the door to the guest room creak open. Not the lock turning, just the door, easing itself ajar. She never went down the hall to check. She just sat there, breath held, heart crawling like a bug against her. Ribs, listening to footsteps drag slow and heavy across the boards. By dawn, it was quiet again. She tried to tell herself it had been her imagination, just nerves, just the house settling. But when she finally forced herself down that hallway, when she finally pushed open the door with shaking hands, the bed was back in place. Mattress smoothed over like it hadn't been touched, sheets tucked neat as a pin, except the floor was whole again. Boards back where they belonged. No hole, no dirt, no sign anyone had ever disturbed it, except the smell dot it lingered beneath. The lavender air freshener and the stale traces of cigarette smoke baked into the walls. That smell of deep earth and something rotting slow and steady, something patient, something waiting. She closed the room up, locked it, put a sign on the listing that said no availability indefinitely. People asked sometimes when they saw her, out getting groceries or paying the light bill at the drop-off box by the old bank. Was she still renting that room? Thought it was a nice little place. Thought she seemed like a kind lady. No, she told them. Not anymore. Too much trouble with strangers these days, and sometimes, late at night, when the wind died and the house settled deep into its bones, she still heard the boards creak in that room at the end of the hall. Something moving beneath them. Digging, always digging. Closer now, closer than she liked to think. They found her name through the Airbnb app, Meredith Crane, 34, from somewhere up north, Ohio maybe, though her profile gave nothing else away. She booked the house for a full month, paid in advance, left glowing reviews for past stays, quiet, respectful, clean, the kind of guest you hope for. But something about this one felt off. Before she even stepped through the door, the house itself was new to the rental circuit, a freshly renovated craftsman on the quiet side of Fredericksburg, Texas, out past the peach orchards where the peach orchards where the peach orchards where the Gritas on the Fredericksburg, Texas, out past the peach orchards where the peach orchards where the peach orchards pour the mes Turina. Roads thinned out and the streetlights didn't reach. A safe little bubble for city people wanting to pretend they were country for a weekend. The host, a woman named Denise, had furnished it carefully, white linens, wicker chairs, a reading nook beside a big bay window, fresh flowers in a vase. Meredith showed up on a Wednesday. Alone, one suitcase, no car. Denise watched her from the kitchen window, wondering if maybe she'd gotten a ride and was planning to Uber when needed. But after the initial polite exchange, hello, thank you, yes it's lovely, no I won't need anything else, Meredith didn't leave the property. Again. Not one stop by Friday, Denise noticed the lights stayed on late. Way past midnight, sometimes past 3. A soft glow leaking from the master bedroom's window, just a crack visible through the closed curtains. No sign of movement, no music. Number. TV. Just light. Sunday morning, Denise stopped by to drop off extra towels. She let herself in with the spare key, as agreed upon, calling out a cheerful hello. No answer. The bedroom door was open. The bed hadn't been slept in. Sheets still tucked in crisp hospital corners the way Denise had made them. Then she noticed the closet, the door barely ajar. A sliver of pale yellow light spilling through. Inside, Meredith was curled up beneath a pile of coats she'd pulled. From the hall closet, Denise's coats. Winter parkas, old windbreakers, even a moth-eaten poncho that hadn't been touched in years. She dragged them all into the walk-in, made herself a little nest on the hardwood floor. She looked up, her eyes dark and dull, skin pale and greasy, her hair a stringy mess. "I'm sorry," Meredith whispered. "I can't stay in the room." Not with it in there. Denise left without asking questions. She called the Airbnb helpline. They said as long as there was no damage, nothing stolen, nothing criminal, there wasn't much to be done. If the woman wanted to sleep in the closet, let her. A week passed. The lights burned all night. Denise stopped coming by. On the day Meredith's booking ended, she vanished, her suitcase gone. No ride, no goodbye. Just gone. The bedroom remained untouched, closet door wide open. Denise didn't notice the writing at first. Not until she brought in the cleaning service to prep for the next guest. Had covered the walls inside the closet. Hundreds of tiny, frantic scrawls looping over each other, layer after layer like spiderwebs spun in panic. At first glance, they seemed like nonsense. Strings of half-formed letters, numbers, shapes. A closer look revealed words, though not words that made sense. They breathed from behind the seams. The seams break. The seams break. The seams break. Over and over, beneath it, between it, wrapped around itself like some feverish mantra. One line stood out, written larger across the inside of the door, the only part not buried beneath the frantic. Scribbles. It comes through the bed. Denise scrubbed the walls herself, painted over them, told herself it was harmless. Just a woman having a breakdown. Nothing paranormal. Nothing supernatural. People lose their grip sometimes, especially people traveling alone. But that night, after locking up, Denise noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the master bedroom, beneath the bed, the hardwood slats bowed slightly, swollen, as though something had pressed up from beneath. The next guests complained of noises. Knocks from inside the walls. A soft, scraping sound under the bed frame. A dragging, breathless shuffle, like fabric moving where fabric shouldn't move. Denise stopped renting the house after that. Couldn't bring herself to explain why. Some nights, when she drove past just to be sure no squatters had broken in, she'd see it, light from the closet. Just a sliver, bleeding out through the crack beneath the door. And sometimes, when she listened hard enough, she swore she could hear. Breathing. But only when she stopped pretending it wasn't there. He left in the middle of the night, frantic. Said he heard it, the walls inhaling, exhaling, louder and louder, closing in. The neighbors found the doors swinging open when the wind had died down, no sign of him anywhere. That house on Oak Ridge Lane, the one with the peeling white paint and the sagging porch, sat silent afterward, but no one ever wanted to go near it again. People whispered about it in town, especially after the man, Caleb Wren, disappeared without a trace. Caleb was a quiet type, never caused trouble, but he wasn't the kind to make up stories either. When he spoke about the house breathing, folks figured he was losing his mind or worse. Caleb had bought that old place 6 months before his disappearance. It was a fixer-upper, the kind of house that had been passed over for years because everyone felt something off about it. The previous owners left suddenly, no explanation. Rumors swirled that something was wrong inside, that the walls themselves held memories no one wanted to uncover. Caleb, stubborn and desperate for a fresh start after his divorce, didn't care. The price was low, and the chance to own his own home was too good to pass up. At first, the house seemed just like any other creaky old structure, settling in the wind, groaning when the rain fell heavy. But soon, Caleb's calm cracked. He called his brother, a steady man named Jim, 3 weeks after moving in. His voice was tight, shaking. "Jim, you gotta come down here. I don't know what's happening, but the house, it's alive. I swear. It's breathing, like it's watching me." Jim laughed it off, told Caleb it was just stress, the isolation, or maybe the walls talking back in his head. Caleb didn't argue. He never was good at saying what was really going on inside his mind. But every night, he grew more restless. The breathing grew louder, a deep, heavy sound, like the house was drawing in air through every crack, every rotten plank. Neighbors noticed Caleb pacing in the yard at odd hours, sometimes talking to himself, sometimes staring blankly at the house like it had swallowed his soul whole. The porch light flickered sporadically, even though the bulb was new. Dogs barked at the house, howled as if warning the world. An old woman across the street swore she saw shadows moving behind the curtains when no one was home. The local kids dared each other to touch the doorframe, but none ever did for long. One evening, Jim drove over, finally taking Caleb seriously. He found his brother sitting on the porch steps, staring at the peeling paint, a faraway look in his eyes. "It's like the house is breathing, Jim. I hear it in the walls. It sucks in air, then lets it out slow, and the sound gets louder and louder until it fills the whole room, like it's alive." Jim put a hand on Caleb's shoulder, but the cold that came back wasn't just from the night air. Caleb's skin felt like ice. That night, Jim stayed, and the house didn't disappoint. At first, the silence was thick, heavy like the kind you feel just before a storm. Then came the subtle shifts, the slow creaking of floorboards, the settling of wood. But beneath it, deeper and more unsettling, was the breathing. A rhythm, slow and steady, growing louder until it seemed to press against your chest, a suffocating presence. The air itself felt heavier, harder to breathe. Jim wanted to leave, to run, but Caleb was frozen, eyes wide, transfixed on the walls. The house seemed to pulse beneath them, alive with something old and hungry. "Did you hear that?" Caleb whispered. "It's coming from inside the walls. I swear it's alive. Like it's watching, waiting to swallow us whole." Jim swallowed hard, feeling a cold sweat break on his forehead. The air grew colder still, the shadows stretching longer. They tried to sleep, but the breathing never stopped. It was the kind of sound that burrows into your mind, twisting reality, until you question your own senses. Jim finally bolted for the door at dawn, leaving Caleb behind. The next morning, Caleb was gone. No note, no sign he'd left. The house sat quiet as if nothing had happened. But the neighbors swore the breathing remained, softer now, like a heartbeat beneath the walls. Weeks later, the local sheriff checked the place out after some strange reports from passers-by, voices heard in the night, the sound of slow breathing filling the empty rooms. The sheriff found nothing but dust and silence. The house looked abandoned, nothing unusual on the surface. But when he stepped inside, a wave of nausea hit him, and the walls seemed to close in just a little tighter. He hurried out, locking the door behind him. No one ever found Caleb. His car was still in the driveway, keys in the ignition, the radio playing static. The house waited, breathing in the empty spaces, hungry for the next soul who dared call it home. And sometimes, late at night, if you listen close on Oak Ridge Lane, you can hear it slow, deep, and steady. The house breathing in and out, alive with secrets that no one wants to uncover. The old house on the edge of Westbrook wasn't the kind of place people passed by without glancing twice. It was too quiet, too still in the way the weathered siding and sagging porch hinted at stories better left untold. The kind of place where the paint peeled like old skin and the wind carried a whisper that no one could quite catch. When Eleanor Bellamy inherited the place from her estranged uncle, she wasn't exactly thrilled. It was the last thing she expected, an empty house, with a nameplate that read Bellamy tucked into a hollow of dead grass and wildflowers, just a few miles from the town's forgotten highway. She thought she'd clean it up, maybe rent it out, and move on. But the house seemed to have other plans. The first night Eleanor spent there was restless. The air inside was thick with dust and something older, something like regret or sorrow. That clung to the corners. She set up the essentials, a cot, a lamp, some canned food, and tried to settle in. That's when the knock came. It wasn't loud, just a gentle tapping on the weathered front door. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at night. She opened it slowly, half expecting a neighbor or a lost traveler. Instead, a man stood there, tall and thin, his face sharp but unreadable under the brim of a worn-out fedora. His eyes caught the moonlight, cold and steady. He introduced himself as Nathaniel Graves, claiming to be an old friend of her uncle's who had important business to discuss. Something in the way he spoke was calm, deliberate, but also distant, like he was carrying something heavy on his soul. Eleanor hesitated, but the night was too quiet, and the sense of being alone in that vast house pressed down on her. She let him in. Nathaniel didn't talk much, but he moved through the house as if it belonged to him. When he looked at the cracked mirrors, there were 5 of them scattered around the place. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. By morning, Eleanor woke to find every mirror had been turned to face the doors of the rooms they hung in. Not a single one reflected the room it was in anymore. Instead, they all stared like sentinels, pointed straight at the doorways. She asked Nathaniel why. He smiled thinly and said, "It's protection. They watch for what's coming." When she pressed for more, he only said, "Sometimes the past tries to walk through the doors." Days passed and Nathaniel remained. His presence was a quiet shadow in the house. He didn't answer calls or messages once he left the next morning, vanishing without a trace. Eleanor's attempts to contact him were met with silence. The townsfolk were wary of him, saying he was the kind of man who brought trouble wherever he went. But it was the mirrors that began to unsettle Eleanor more and more. At night, she would catch glimpses, just at the edge of her vision, of something shifting behind the glass, something that shouldn't be there. The reflections didn't match the rooms anymore. They showed flickers of hallways that twisted into darkness, shadows stretching into impossible shapes. One evening, Eleanor awoke to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway outside her room. She sat up, heart pounding, but the door remained closed. When she glanced at the mirror across from her, she saw a figure standing just behind the door's reflection, watching. It was Nathaniel, or maybe it wasn't. The face was wrong, distorted in a way that made her skin crawl. She blinked, and the image vanished. The next day, Eleanor tried to remove the mirrors, but they were nailed tight, and the frames were old, heavy wood that seemed fused to the walls. She felt as if they resisted, as if the house itself didn't want them moved. She left the house, locking the doors behind her, but the unease followed her like a shadow. That night, the phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was Nathaniel's, but hollow and distant. "They're coming," he whispered. "The doors are open now." The call stopped after that. Eleanor returned to the house, determined to confront whatever was waiting. She noticed the mirrors again, their reflections deeper now, darker. She stared into one, and the image warped, revealing a twisted corridor she'd never seen before. From within that warped reflection, a hand pressed against the glass, pale and trembling. The eyes behind it were empty pits. The doors started to creak open on their own, slow, agonizingly slow, as if inviting something in. Eleanor backed away, heart hammering, but the house felt alive now, breathing around her, the mirrors pulsing with silent menace. She realized then that Nathaniel wasn't protecting the house from something outside. He was keeping something trapped inside, something that needed the mirrors facing the doors, keeping watch, keeping it contained. But the doors were opening, and whatever was behind the glass was no longer content to stay silent. Eleanor never left the house after that night. The neighbors noticed lights flickering and strange noises drifting from the old Bellamy place. Sometimes, late at night, a figure could be seen standing at the window, staring out with empty eyes. And every mirror in the house still faces the doors, watching, waiting for the next visitor foolish enough to enter. The motel was the kind that tried hard to look like it belonged in a better part of town. Fresh paint, clean lines, and a neon sign buzzing softly in the humid Texas night. But as soon as you stepped inside the lobby, the thin veil of civility peeled away, revealing something much darker beneath. The air smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke and something metallic, like old blood or rust. The host, a middle-aged man named Harold, with a face weathered by years behind the counter, never smiled much but wasn't unkind either. He was the kind of person who kept his eyes open longer than necessary, the kind who noticed things others missed. The woman arrived late one Thursday evening. She was thin, wearing a faded denim jacket that hung loosely over her shoulders like a second skin. Her hair was long, tangled, and dark, falling past her collarbone in uneven strands. She carried no luggage but clutched a small leather-bound notebook with trembling hands. When she checked in, she said she was alone. Harold remembered that because there was something about her voice soft, but with an edge of something desperate, something pleading. "I'll be here 3 nights," she told him, her eyes flickering toward the dusty window that looked out over the cracked parking lot. Room 7. She paid cash without hesitation and disappeared down the narrow hall with the creaking floorboards that groaned like old ghosts waking up. The first night, Harold heard nothing unusual. The woman kept mostly to her room, only stepping out once or twice to grab a soda from the vending machine or to smoke a cigarette in the back alley. But he noticed she never made calls, never spoke to anyone, and never left the premises after sundown. She wrote furiously in that notebook until late, the scratching of pen on paper carrying faintly through the thin walls. By the second night, Harold was on edge. Something about the woman unsettled him. When she came down to the lobby for ice, her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she hadn't slept. Her voice was quieter now, almost a whisper. "They're here," she said, looking around as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "They don't want me here." Harold wanted to dismiss it as paranoia. Maybe she was just tired, scared. But her fear felt real, palpable, as if invisible fingers were brushing the back of his neck every time she spoke. The third morning, she called Harold from her room phone. The static was thick, but her voice was trembling. "I'm leaving early," she said. "They told me last night. They don't want me here anymore. I can't stay." Harold tried to persuade her to stay, to rest, to talk it out, but she was resolute. She packed a small bag, eyes darting toward every shadow as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. As she walked out, Harold felt the coldest chill of the summer sweep the lobby. The moment she disappeared into the dawn light, a low rumble echoed from the hallway like a door slamming far down the hall. He stepped outside, scanning the parking lot, but the woman was gone. Her car was nowhere in sight. The only trace left was the faint smell of cigarettes and something else, something sour and old, like a forgotten grave. Later that day, Harold checked room 7. The walls were scrawled with faint, almost invisible words written in what looked like dried blood. The woman's notebook lay open on the bed, its pages filled with frantic writing, the words looping and twisting into shapes that made no sense. But one phrase repeated over and over, "They never leave." Harold called the police, but no one could find the woman. She vanished without a trace, like a ghost slipping through the cracks of the world. The motel guests who stayed afterward whispered about strange noises in the night, cold spots and flickering lights in room 7. Some swore they saw a woman's shadow at the window, pacing restlessly, her eyes pleading for help no one could. Give Dot and Harold, he never stayed late at the motel again. Not after hearing the whispers in the walls, the scratching behind the wallpaper, the voice that said softly, "I'm not alone." Because sometimes the things that don't want you to leave, they don't just haunt the night. They follow you home. The night was quiet in the small Texas town of Rosewood, the kind of quiet that draped over you like a heavy wool blanket, thick and suffocating. It wasn't the silence you'd find in peaceful places, no. This was the silence that settled before something terrible was about to unfold. Mike Jennings, a drifter in his late 40s with a face weathered by years of bad decisions and harder luck, pulled into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the rundown motel on the edge of town. The Rosewood Inn, its faded neon sign flickering, weakly like a dying ember, was the only place left that would give him a room without too many questions. He didn't want questions, just a bed and 4 walls that would keep the outside world at bay, even if only for a night. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of old cigarettes and musty carpet. The receptionist, a tired woman who looked as if she hadn't smiled in years, handed Mike a rusty key on a chipped plastic fob marked 12B. The room was at the far end of the hallway, and as he walked past the cracked walls and peeling wallpaper, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. It was the kind of feeling that crawled under your skin and whispered in your ear, but Mike shrugged it off. He was used to those whispers. They had followed him for most of his life. The room was dim, lit only by the orange glow from a flickering street lamp outside the window. The bed sagged in the middle, and the sheets were threadbare and smelled faintly of sweat and regret. Mike dropped his bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress, running a hand through his tangled hair. He was tired, bone-deep tired, and all he wanted was to close his eyes and disappear from everything that had been chasing him past mistakes, lost chances, ghosts he couldn't outrun. But sleep wouldn't come easy. Around midnight, the silence was broken by a faint scratching sound. At first, Mike thought it was the wind rattling the window pane or maybe a stray branch scraping against the side of the building. But the scratching grew louder, more deliberate, more insistent. It was coming from the wall opposite the bed, thin sheetrock that separated him from the next room, or maybe from the motel's empty corridors. Mike sat up, listening. The scratching became a slow, dragging noise, like something sharp being pulled across the wall over and over again. He felt his pulse quicken, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. The motel had a reputation. He had heard whispers from other drifters at gas station stories about strange things in room 12B, but he'd never believed them. Now he wasn't so sure. He grabbed the flashlight from his bag and shone it toward the wall. The beam revealed deep gouges, long and jagged, ripped into the sheetrock like claws had torn through it. The marks were fresh, the drywall crumbling, where the scratches cut the surface. There was no explanation. No signs of who or what could have done this. The scratches just were. Mike's hands trembled slightly as he moved closer to the wall, his flashlight beam trembling with them. The sound stopped suddenly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that pressed in on him like the walls themselves were closing in. He pressed his ear to the cold surface, half expecting to hear something breathing or worse, waiting. The motel's old wiring flickered overhead, plunging the room briefly into darkness before the light came back on. And then, he noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible movement beneath the gouges. Something shifting behind the wall, moving slowly. His breath caught in his throat, his mind raced. Maybe rats, maybe a stray animal trapped inside the motel walls. But this wasn't the typical skittering or scratching of rodents. It was deliberate, heavy, and filled with a malevolent patience. Mike backed away, heart pounding, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. The next morning, the receptionist didn't ask about the scratches or the noises. She barely looked at him when he handed back the key. Mike thought maybe it was better that way. Some things were better left unspoken in places like this. But when he returned months later, hoping for some closure or maybe just a drink in the local bar, he found that room 12B was permanently closed off, a hastily scrawled sign taped to the door reading, "Under repair." The gouges were gone, replaced by fresh drywall and new paint. Yet, the memory of those deep scratches, those invisible fingers clawing just beneath the surface, stayed with him long after he left Rosewood. No explanation, no apology. Just the lingering fear that whatever made those marks wasn't done with him yet. The afternoon sun hung low over that stretch of forgotten Texas highway, casting long shadows over the peeling paint of the old rental house just off Route 67. It was one of those places nobody bothered with anymore, a small, tired house set. Back from the road, surrounded by cracked concrete and a yard overgrown with ragweed and stubborn thistles. The kind of house that looked like it held on to its secrets tighter than the locks on the front door. Which was strange, considering that when the host, a man named Clayton, arrived after the guest checked out early, the house was nothing but a hollow shell. Clayton had owned the place for almost 10 years, a relic he kept on the cheap for travelers, or long-haul truckers who needed a stopover. He didn't expect much from it, just a little income to help with bills and the land taxes that kept creeping up. The house wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a small living room, but it had always been stocked with the basics. A couch, a kitchen table, an old refrigerator that hummed louder than it should, even a cheap TV nailed to the wall. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep people comfortable for a night or two. The last booking had been odd from the start. The reservation came from a man named Harris. No last name. No phone number. Just an email address with a cryptic handle. The kind of booking that made Clayton's gut twist a little. But it wasn't like the highway attracted many people who cared much about privacy or social niceties. Truckers, drifters, lost souls, they all passed through, and he figured Harris was just another face on the road. Clayton had dropped the keys off at the small storage locker by the porch on the afternoon Harris was supposed to arrive. No handshake, no eye contact, just a name and a code. When the guest first showed up, it was late, nearly midnight, and the headlights of his dusty old pickup cut through the darkness like a beacon. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes that blended into the night, and he moved with a kind of quiet purpose, like he had a secret mission or was trying to stay unnoticed. 3 nights, right? Clayton asked, leaning on the doorframe, watching the stranger unlock the door with a key that matched the code. 3. Harris said, voice low and gravelly. The first night passed without incident. Harris didn't make a sound, kept to himself. Mostly, wandering outside only briefly to smoke or stare at the sky. Clayton didn't pry. He never did with his guests. But on the second morning, just after sunrise, Harris packed up and left. No note, no explanation, just a quiet exit that left Clayton scratching his head. When Clayton returned later that day to clean and prepare for the next booking, that's when things got downright strange. The door, well, what should have been. The door was missing. Not just unlocked or open, but entirely gone. The wooden frame stood empty, a black hole into the house. The windows were still intact, dusty but unbroken. Clayton's first thought was maybe Harris had broken in again and left it open careless. But when he stepped inside, the chill hit him like a cold slap. The furniture was gone. The couch, the chairs, the kitchen table, the old refrigerator all vanished. It wasn't just moved or shifted. It was as if the entire house had been stripped down to its bare bones. The floorboards creaked underfoot. Empty shelves stared back like hollow sockets. The only thing left was the peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of damp wood and dust. Clayton called the local sheriff, who came out, flashlight in hand, to take a look. They found no signs of forced entry aside from the missing door, which puzzled them both. There were no footprints leading away from the house, only the usual dust and dirt kicked up by the wind. No tire tracks besides Harris's old pickup, which was still parked outside, locked and untouched. The sheriff suggested it might be some kind of elaborate theft, but it didn't make sense. Who steals every single piece of furniture and appliances from a house in the middle of nowhere without a trace? And what about the door? The door itself was a solid oak slab, heavy enough that it would have left marks or scratches or something on the ground or walls when taken. But there was nothing. Clayton started checking with neighbors, none of whom had seen Harris after he arrived. A few remembered seeing the pickup parked there for a while, but no one saw any activity resembling moving furniture out. The house was isolated enough that anything unusual would have stood out. That night, Clayton sat outside the house on the cracked porch steps, staring at the empty frame where the front door used to be. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the long shadows began to creep back in. He felt uneasy, like the house was watching him. The breeze carried a faint whisper, almost like a sigh, but he chalked it up to the wind. Around midnight, he swore he heard footsteps inside. Soft, deliberate, pacing slowly across the bare floor. He told himself it was the old house settling, or maybe a stray animal. But the footsteps grew heavier, a steady thump against the hollow floor, like someone or something was moving through the empty rooms. Clayton wanted to leave, but something held him there. A pull he couldn't explain, a mixture of dread and curiosity. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside again, the beam cutting through the darkness. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, broken only by the faint echo of his own breathing. Then, he saw it. Scratches on the wall near the missing door frame. Deep gouges, like nails or claws, had raked across the wood. They weren't there before. His heart hammered in his chest as he shined the light around the room. The scratches seemed fresh, raw, bleeding into the shadows. He heard a whisper then. Clearer this time, a voice that was barely audible but unmistakably human. "Leave." "Leave?" Clayton spun around, flashlight darting across every corner. The house was empty. No Harris. No one. The next morning, the sheriff returned with a small team to investigate more thoroughly. They found the same emptiness, the missing door, the scratches, but no footprints or clues. Harris was gone without a trace. The pickup vanished too. It was as if he and every possession he brought had simply evaporated into thin air. Clayton started hearing stories later from travelers who passed by the highway near the house, whispers of a man who stays in that place, taking whatever he needs, leaving behind nothing but an empty shell. Some said the house was cursed, that anyone who stayed too long risked losing everything they owned, maybe even themselves. Clayton never rented the house again. The doorframe remained open to the world, a haunting reminder of the guest who left the house completely empty and the terrible silence that followed. He sometimes thought he heard the faint creak of floorboards at night, or a whisper carried on the wind telling him to leave, just like the scratches on the wall said. Some things don't check out. Some guests never really leave. And some houses keep their secrets by taking everything with them: doors, furniture, and even the souls of those who dare stay too long.